Hello, world, America, world, fellow YouTubers, people who aren't on YouTube. If you have a Google account, it's very easy to get a YouTube account. And so if you ever want or need to put a video up, it becomes very easy. Programming is more simple than everyone realizes. For example, each of the sciences are more simple than everyone realizes. And they are complicated tactical ulterior than that is expressed syntactically by the experts since semi ancient time in every country individually grouped in together as names. Now, tactically ulterior from how nature assigned these names. Hyper native pure. That's one of the reasons nature shows the value of Native American difference is only increasing because there was a breaching method upon them as humanity's volume, sickly distinctly from upon us, with black pupils, whites of eyes. No. See, and that assigned other and other being and having been blamed for it, then what really we know it was a breaching method was true always. That's not a truth that can be used. That's revelations come from that. To block revelations in that which is actually naturally demonstrated. For example, I was watching on television. Well, I don't remember the television station, so I'm not going to use that example. But because then I would have to quote it. But in other words, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, their sources, they have roles with a guy named a former director of the FBI, a former standing chairperson on the racketeering influence to corrupt organization statute, as with police chiefs retired and standing, multiple departments, and a long-standing one, a police chief Cintron, and one from before that, with the same house, and one's tied to them, involved with predicate acts, wire crimes, faking audio, video transcripts into branch databases, at crime scenes, intercampuses, in truck campuses, each one of them, and the same thing with the town, each city, and grouped all locations slash S, all locations, areas, and states were used by the breaching method that our founders left us to communicate about. And it communicated for us to explain the difference between the founders who had to counter extort the other founders real fast. And then see, once they did that, they made those other people speak things that were against the laws that they agreed to use, individually grouped in together, suits and ties and counters to it, the foundation of it. Before our founders were born, slavery is entrenched north and south. That fact that is true always. North and South colonies, before they were even born, that was entrenched. The suburbs were already designed, tactically denatured, ongoing, unceasingly, increasingly to an extent. Native Americans had already sickly, distinctly had their human difference measured and maintained, used by a breaching method effectively. That employed off the records employment, just to use the word too, employment, keep it knave, and everyone pretending other. It employed the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures to be blamed on other things, others, and or on selves. Every way the species body is individually grouped and together. And it knew that if it could force, trick, hurt, and persuade and sustain that long enough, there would be self-valued roles with that nature of logic that cannot defend itself simultaneously and afford the short words of any science, let alone the law, which the other sciences would lead. I mean, and the law would lead the other sciences if one of them had free speech. See, every person knows that New York is not free. And there are people who will pretend passions and emotions to pretend they're free. How they get away with it is one thing, but how that also applies to how the breaching method is left out of logic. One of the things that forced those crazy things with history, like slavery, was a human fact keeping nature breaching method that was entrenched before the founders of modern countries, like America, like Ukraine, like Russia. The suburbs in Russia look exactly like the suburbs in America, because since before their countries founders were born, before our country's founders were born, a breaching method was entrenched that forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded people to needs and as natures to counter itself, knowing they would counter things wrong, like criminal insidiousness as fact-keeping nature, countering it wrong, blaming it on other things, others, or selves where it counts. So still, it employed effectively self-valued descriptions of negative value nature progression, like shootings. It measures and maintains sickly distinctly from our own. And everywhere the species body is, uses of your name. That means our name where it is species body, now tactical ulterior. It is groups differences, now tactical ulterior. From the only identity that is as itself. In other words, it is not the species, but it is to an extent. It is why the species, even plants and animals, share cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall. It is why they have the science mixed theory on proton nucleus, electron. See, these are three identities of relationship to themselves. If you look at cells through the microscope of a vegetable, it is easier. In other words, they'll tell you there's little differences, and that makes the difference between the cell body and the cell nucleus. It's one thing, it is true always. It's easier to see, easier to discern. Three distinct identities of relativity to itself, which also comes with what reception of gases and water and earth and its elements is also in reception of. See, naturally employed things like hunger, the need hunger to eat all the time. That hypernatural truth that comes with revelations. That was assigned to two and as systems individually grouped and together, humanity voicings that could not defend themselves formally / informally and afford short words using that nature of truth that is revelation. Per the definition of revelation since before modern religions, to keep debates on this, knave while pretending other, not sophisticated, where there's supposed to be sophistication, simultaneously sophistication where they're not supposed to be sophistication. As self-valued roles with criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatments. And that is, wherever there is a positive or negative treatment, it has an identity conjunction. See, because each identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. And further, we are a quality of diffusion this way. Where and how? The identity of the hypersimultaneous is one volume distinct from all others, but it is as all others. But while not, for how it is making more and more of itself its identity of relationship to itself and the value of that per science, there are three increasing volumes where volume equals value as nature slash nature as value. And this is where and how it is functional, how hyper invisible is distinct from invisible but still discernible. The subject and the predicate are two distinctly invisible but still discernible identities of volume. And this is where and how, properly to be described, the hyper metaphysics slash metaphysics exists and existed. More probably and demonstrably, they were scientific values to describe two different distinct identities of relationship to itself that are simultaneous, that the identity of the hyper-simultaneous has per ancient pantheism. There are proofs that ancient pantheism was and is a science, the science slash S. It was a slash each slash the science, the same way we are individual grouped together, the same way we are cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall slash S together. Them sharing the water and the elements of Earth. Why? How we hunger. Again, syntactically described and entertained, having been and being described. Tactical ulterior from how by nature that was employed and is employed. And it shows us that and how it also it requires us to be additional identity slash S simultaneously. That too is being and having been measured and maintained. Worse than just entertained with the logic of fact, cheap nature, predator roles. Fact, cheap nature, predicate acts roles. Forgiveness is to get through that. Because being used remotely, individually grouped and together, are all identities of sophistication. Now all tactical ulterior from that which is that identity which is hyper native. Its only increasing value is if we're honest, it shows the only increasing value of Native Americans being sickly distinctly hurt by a breaching method from everyone else. Those laws and the summary of them. This is a science that is greater than and more finite than maths sciences individually grouped together. This is a science that appreciates and uses the identity. We just said something. Chat disconnected. Please wait while. Okay, people. But this is the point. Mass farming was forced. Regardless of people's opinions, they make subjects. Well, let's see what everyone thinks about mass farming. Not one person's leaving all the variables involved. Nature uses variables in what is constant as itself. Tactical ulterior too, therefore, than our systems. Tactically not a hyper-native. Tactically, there is a difference between nature as criminal insidiousness in nature. Strangers originally and still are kept needing to hide and self-value criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, while other ones are self-value and criminal insidiousness natures of negative treatments that they know and or don't too, and the difference of that. Effectively employed roles with the identity theft slash fraud slash slander method, sickly distinctly against Native Americans, sickly distinctly against anyone with black pupils and whites of eyes. And this breaching method knew when we were the youngest kids, we could discern this fake integrity, and we could explain that. The breaching method was also right to discern that and how people would sense that, where and how the identities of mayors, of everyone tied to them, of senators, even all natures of experts. Forget about it with the mental health community. Their databases have been criminally foreign influenced, tactically delusions wrought since founding, since before founding. They have roles with methods with all sides in criminal and civil cases, and with victims advocates they have with courts, and with all the identities of the courts, even ones with the hallways, and the programs raising the interbranch, exceptions tied to them, like the prisons, like the military, like the medical campuses, fire campuses. They are shared with other countries, individually grouped too. They can't defend their grouping, their grouped, the value, the reason why we are individual grouped together. The reason why other species have these group differences, ages, areas, sexes. These are conversations that we are not allowed to use real science with, because offensively, fake sciences pretend other. And they blame it on politics to keep the individual, no matter who, if they're a Democrat or Republican or an exception. Exceptions have already been used, tactical ulterior, with fact-shaping natures, with identities, voices, and personally and professionally. Our interbranch are kept with overt criminal enterprises and private ones originally and still employed by the breaching method to be used by them, where they're shown they're used remotely criminally foreign influenced, fact-shaping nature possessions, valuing and having value. The real causes for negative value nature progressions acts in nature, such as roles with slavery, blamed on other things other than ourselves, leaving out the torture method from being understood, leaving out the torture/slavery method against everyone, including our founders. Again, those who had to counter extort the other founders. They only had means to do it real fast. But the system of laws and of using, measuring, and maintaining from abroad also grouped, because they were done against themselves too. There's a possession. This breaching method knew that there were going to be formal suits and ties counters to them, needing to use each country's names. Now they even have nuclear weapons behind themselves. They have all the evidences in the world they need to admit that fake sciences have been pretending other. See, but they don't know how to. They only know how to interpret our formal legal stewards. They only know how to interpret the law. Criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought, per this method that senses and hurts. Who's going to use from birth to age 3, to grade 3, from grade 3 to 6th grade. They have been stacking predicate acts into the campuses. Where and how each modern nation is used remotely, shown needs preemptively, actively grouped, and increasingly to hide from and keep discerned what is actually recorded and regarding other people's names and locations, names and voicings. So we have the experts of each of the sciences, like farming, or like gardening, soil. The soil, there's a difference between what's going to take to make a plant grow if you do these things. In other words, and if the soil already had nature's system that drops leaves and grass, in other words, breaks down and then comes back. We take that away. We took it away. It's slowly been changing the nature of the soil since it was tactically denatured in colonial times, Oh, well, look at now. It's not, it's not going to get back unless we get organic material into the ground, and it's been too long. It employed the value of that material tactically, wanted and needed by others at other locations. We throw this junk away. Even when we throw it away, even though it could be used. One thing we could do is start putting some kind of a liquid feed into the soil. We cannot waste these seasons. We have to understand, since before each modern country founders were born, the earth was tactically denatured. To counter fact, human nature, predicate acts, methods, and natures, they had to do it wrongly as that. Whole fact, human nature, predicate acts, methods, sicker than even some of the killers, and even uses of killers, and even tortured out while they're in prison, pretending that because they don't like them because they're a killer, to hide their uses of the same locations, their uses of the same names next to it. All investigators, and vetting of perception is effectively being and having been employed by a human fact, human nature breaching method. You don't have to call it a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. But nature demonstrates that it conceived modern countries individually grouped and together as names, as archetypal criminal enterprises that can't defend that syntactically and not afford, but the self-value means needs in nature's presented to them while they are simultaneously measured and maintained syntactical natures being and having been used remotely. The Patriot Act used the word patriot and the word act and the phrase criminally foreign influenced, where and how our identities of the law voices and their family members and their campuses that are involved with the database, illusion stacking, predicate acts methods, semi-conducted for them. And these are also roles with the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones where they are really most further, having been worse self-value uses of them. Our countries individually, like countries with nuclear weapons, have roles with psychiatry, drugs, medicines, and mental diagnosis, and uses of those databases to fake conversations, fake evidences into databases with agencies, directors, their family members, their intimate ties, people criminally involved with them, overt criminal enterprises and private ones involved with predicate acts, with facts with them, with the news companies, with the locations next to them. Our intelligence community is criminally foreign influence, remote uses of them. When we are young kids, we have means to answer questions with short words proper. That is maintained. If you do that already, they're going to have people, and what they do is put fake conversations between kids, fake natures of them completely